Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my May wrap up for you guys. So I would definitely say I had a pretty decent reading month in May. I don't think it's been my best reading month so far, but I definitely got to a lot of books, which I have been meaning to get to. I ended up reading 15 books and I read 5,137 pages, so that's quite good. I'm quite happy about that. I just unfortunately did not find any 5-star books in May, which is quite disheartening. However, I feel like my June reading is gonna be really good, so holding out hope for that. But without any more rambling, I'm just going to start talking about the 15 books that I read this month because we do have quite a lot of things to go through. So I'm just going to be randomly grabbing off my pile. Again, it's easier this way. Maybe one of these days I will remember to order these books, but I did not. So the first book that I have on this stack is The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 4th and final book in Mistborn Era 2. I'm sure if you guys have been watching any of my vlogs, you have heard a lot of my thoughts on Mistborn Era 2 so far. I had the best time going through this series. I feel like it was the fact that I went into Era 2 not thinking I was going to like it at all that really surprised me and made me enjoy it all that much more. This series is set 300 years after the original Mistborn trilogy, which you do have to read first, but I know a lot of people kind of don't really have too many great things to say about Era 2, but I just loved Era 2. I love the characters. I think it's a really good balance of action, character work, plot development, world Cosmere development. There's so many things, especially towards the end of this series, that expand upon the Cosmere as a whole, and it's so freaking cool. And I just loved Era 2 so much. I think overall my enjoyment level of Era 2 was infinitely higher. Well, okay, I don't know if I want to say infinitely higher, that's a bit much. Was quite a bit higher than that of Era 1, even though I do love the Final Empire the most out of all of the books so far that are out in kind of the Mistborn series. But it was just amazing. This book specifically, I'm not really gonna say too much about because it is the 4th book in its own series and the 7th book in the Mistborn series. But for the most part, it was so good. I think my only kind of criticism is that this book was doing a lot. And I feel like there were a couple of things that it didn't exactly go too in-depth on that I really wanted to know more about. But for the most part, I just loved the character work in this book specifically, and I really liked seeing how this series ended. I felt like it was decently satisfying. I liked it a lot. So I don't think it's my favorite out of Era 2. I feel like The Bands of Mourning is probably my favorite out of the 4, but this one was still really good. Next up, I have my Patreon buddy read for last month, but I did end up finishing it on the 1st of this month, and that is Inkblood Sister Scribe by Emma Turs. This is kind of I think it's kind of a magical realism sort of book. Basically, you're following these two sisters who are a part of this family that looks after a magical library. I think conceptually this book is really cool because the way that the magic in this world works is through all of these books that are in this library. Like, you write a book and it then does something magical, basically. I just didn't really end up loving the story. I feel like it was pretty slow moving. I didn't really feel connected to any of the characters in any significant way. And I think this book reads a little bit more contemporary than what I would normally go for in a fantasy book, even though I don't think this is necessarily marketed as a fantasy book. In that way, it kind of reminds me of Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman. I feel like that's kind of the book that I was thinking of the whole time because I feel like it has the same balance of contemporary things going on. You're following these two sisters who are tied to magic, but the story itself doesn't really feel fantasy-esque. And that's kind of how I was feeling about this book. So it just didn't end up being one of my favorites. I think it's really well written. I liked it. I would probably consider reading something else by Emma Turs, but this one just wasn't my favorite. Next up, we have what may be one of my most disappointing reads of the month, which is so sad because this edition is so beautiful, but that is A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle L. Jensen. First of all, look at, oh, it's got the sparkly blue sprayed pages. It's got the beautiful cover. I do aesthetically love this book. However, you know, the actual story left something to be desired, in my opinion. Basically, this is a Norse-inspired fantasy romance kind of story following our main character, Freya, and through just a lot of turns of events, she ends up married to this very power-hungry, I think he's a Jarl. I'm pretty sure he's a Jarl who's one of their leaders in this kind of Norse-inspired world. Because in this world, there's this prophecy that is seemingly about her, and anybody who has, I think, control over her will then rise to power. I don't really know if I got that prophecy correct because it's been a minute since I've read this book, but something to that effect. So she is a very hot commodity and like everybody wants to like obtain her, basically, which is gross. Obviously that's a gross word to like use when talking about women, but like that is how they view it in this world. So throughout this whole book, you're following her as she is navigating this new marriage that she has been thrust into, but also she is like a big target for a lot of other people in this world. So she's trying to not get taken, killed, kidnapped, whatever. But obviously this is also a fantasy romance story, and her love interest is her new husband's son. So like, it's not weird in the book, but like saying it out loud, you're like, ooh, I don't know about that. So do with that as you will, I guess. But I just had a couple of different issues with this book. I didn't really think the character dynamics were super well fleshed out in the story, both in the romance and the friendships that were present. I feel like there was no build up to any of the relationships that our main character Freya was in. So when she was like acting a certain way, I was like, why are you acting a certain way? Like, it didn't really make sense. And I also just found this story to really drag as we got towards the end, which was really disappointing because in the first like 100 or so pages, I was really loving this book. Like, it was really fast paced, there was a lot of action, there were just a lot of things happening, and I was immediately kind of pulled into this world and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I feel like there was maybe a little too much action in the beginning of the book and not enough character work to make me kind of feel for these characters as the story progressed, and I kind of just lost interest a little bit. I also strongly dislike how this book ended. I have thoughts and opinions about it, but I will not share it because I don't want to spoil anything, but I just hate it. I'm over it. I'm over how this book ends. However, I do think there were definitely some cool things in this book. As I said, this was Norse inspired and I really like seeing a lot of those elements brought into it. And I also, even though the romance was instant love, like a little bit, I still for the most part really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I just don't know if I care enough to continue the series. Like, I might. Honestly, if they put out another stunning edition like this for the second one, I might have to buy it and continue it. I'm like teetering back and forth as to whether or not I want to continue the series. But we will see, because I do think the end of this book opens up the world a bit more and I am somewhat intrigued. Then I do have 2 volumes of a manga series that I started this month, but I haven't continued, but I definitely want to read some more volumes in June, and that is Witch Hat. But basically this series follows our main character Coco, who gets kind of thrust into this magical world. She becomes an apprentice to this witch, this dude right here, and she just gets into some antics with her fellow apprentices. It's been really magical and fun so far, but I'm thinking, and some of you guys have told me, that this series does get a little bit darker as you continue through, and I can definitely see kind of the groundwork being laid for that, and I'm so intrigued because the beginning of this series feels so like light and whimsical and fun. So the fact that it is kind of bringing in those darker tones, I'm like, where is this going? I love the art style. It's just really pretty. Like, look at that. So I've really been enjoying this series so far, and I will be continuing. The next up I read In the Labyrinth of Drakes by Marie Brennan. This is the 4th book in the Lady Trent series, and I loved this book so much. And I was not expecting that at all. I wouldn't say I was not enjoying this series up until this point, because I definitely was. Basically, the series is following our main character Isabella, who is a dragon naturalist, meaning she's somebody that studies dragons. I know I say the exact same thing every time I intro this series, but like that is the best way to intro this series. But it is set in a fantasy world in a time period that kind of mimics the Victorian times. It definitely has a historical fantasy type of feel to it, but it's very much its own thing still. In this book specifically, you are following our main character Isabella as she is again going on an expedition. She goes on different expeditions in all of these series, and this one just kind of ended up being my favorite, so I think that definitely ended up making this book one of my favorites. Especially the second half of this book, because there's this whole scene where they go into this abandoned ancient temple and they're discovering secret passageways. There are like stones that you like step on, and like booby traps are enabled and all that kind of stuff. Very much felt like Indiana Jones, and I love the archaeology vibes. Like, I love that so much, and I need more books like that. But I just loved the setting of this book. I really thought this book was very, I don't want to say fast-paced, because I don't really think this is a fast-paced series, and I kind of like it for that reason, but sometimes I do want a little more action from these books, and I think this one definitely gave that to me. And I really liked a lot of the character dynamics that were present in this book as well. So I'm definitely back to loving this series, and I cannot wait to get to the 5th one, which I'm really hoping I can read in June. I make no promises on that front, but I'm hoping I can. Then next up we have a book that I'm not as enthused about, and that is The Witch Would Not by Olivia Atwater. This is again kind of a historical fantasy book. This is the first book in her not Regency. a Victorian fairy tale series, because she does have a Regency fairy tale series, which is the series that Half a Soul is a part of. I love Half a Soul. So I was really excited when I heard that she had this book coming out, because it is a little bit of a darker fairy tale because it does take place in a different time period. And basically this book is following our main character Winnie, who becomes kind of a governess at this weird mansion. And my main issue with this book is that I don't think the back of it describes it very accurately. Like, plot-wise, yes, but like what it's promising, not really. My main issue is that this book describes itself as a gothic fantasy romance, and in no way is this book a gothic fantasy romance. It is gothic, it is fantasy, but the romance comes in at like the 80% mark. And it comes out of nowhere. Like, there's no build up to it whatsoever. I think with the rise of fantasy romance, obviously everybody loves fantasy romance. I love fantasy romance. Everybody wants to describe things as fantasy romance. And sometimes they're just not. And I think the story is really good. And I don't think it needs to be labeled that way, but the fact that it was, and the fact that that was kind of where my expectations were, did make it a little bit disappointing. And also I think the back of the book gives away a plot point that doesn't happen until like 75% of the way through the book. So on that count too, I was like, what are we doing? Like, I don't know. I liked the story. I really enjoyed the overall vibe, the atmosphere. It's dark. There's malevolent fae running around this manor, and like, I live for things like that. But just overall, the plot didn't really deliver or grab me in any significant way. However, I did really love our main character, Winnie. I thought she was very competent. I thought she was very level-headed, and I really loved following her around. And there were also a lot of side characters that I enjoyed as well. So I have negatives, but I also have positives for it. I will definitely be continuing this series because I did like it, and I want to see kind of what the next story is like, because I would assume, like the Regency fairy tale series, they're all going to be kind of set in the same world but follow different stories. So I will be reading the next one because I do love Olivia Atwater's writing so much. It's so beautiful. Next up, I do have some romance books that I read this month, and I'm just gonna kind of talk about them together because I read 2 books by Abby Jimenez. I read Just for the Summer, which is my favorite one. This might be vying for my favorite book of the month, I'm not sure, but I also decided to read Part of Your World as well. These 2 are part of a companion series. I did not read them in the order that you're supposed to. I don't 100% think that you need to, but at this point I would probably recommend that you read them in the right order, because there are characters that pop up in Part of Your World, which is the first one, that do play a decently significant role in Just for the Summer, so you don't like have to read them in order, but I think a lot of you guys recommended that I read them in order. I'm so sorry I did not listen to you. But I am here to tell you that I would also recommend maybe reading them in the correct order. So Part of Your World is following our main character Alexis, who is a very well-off doctor, but in the very beginning of this book you see her kind of on the way back from a funeral, I believe, and she's driving through this small town and she ends up kind of swerving out of the road to, I think, avoid a raccoon, and she ends up in a ditch. And obviously some very kind, very hot also guy comes and helps her out of this ditch. She's kind of like, oh my god, hey. And obviously things ensue from there. They kind of hit it off. They're a little bit obsessed with each other, but they are from 2 different worlds. Hence the title of the book, because he lives in this very small town. He doesn't have a lot of money. She is from kind of like the big city as far as like he's concerned, and she has a very different lifestyle to what he lives, and there are just a lot of kind of issues that arise due to that difference, but they obviously end up working things out because it's a romance book, and I really enjoyed this one. It's definitely not my favorite, but I had a really good time reading it. I think my only problem so far with Abby Jimenez books is that the 2 main characters have been in love like instantly in both of these books, and I can kind of get into it because I think with these books especially, they do have like the romance, but they also have kind of deeper topics and themes that they touch on. So I understand like not wanting too much angst in the romance, so you can kind of focus on those other things as well. So even though there are a lot of issues going on in the relationship, I like a little more build up than what these books offered me, but I feel like I've kind of just accepted that's kind of like how it is, and I can get into it, like it'll be fine. So I enjoyed this one a lot. I thought it was really cute, but I did not enjoy it nearly as much as I enjoyed Just for the Summer. I feel like everybody has been loving Just for the Summer, me included. I just picked it up because I saw a lot of people talking about it. I wanted a summery romance, and this was kind of perfect, honestly. I had such a good time reading this book. It was so cute. Basically, this is following our main character, what's her name, Emma? And the beginning of this book opens up on her reading this Reddit post of this guy talking about how he has a curse where every time he dates a woman and they break up, she goes and finds her soulmate afterwards. And Emma is very much plagued by the same problem, so she hits him up. She's like, hey, we should do this thing where like we date each other and our curses can cancel out, and then when we break up, maybe we will like go our separate ways and find our soulmates. And he's like, okay, bet, let's do it. So this book follows them as they're going through this like pseudo fake dating kind of thing, even though again they are kind of instantly in love with each other. But I think there's a lot of other things that are happening in this book that definitely need the page time, so I understand why there wasn't like a lot of build up to their relationship. Like on the first date they were obsessed and I was like, all right, fine, that's just how it is. But the thing is, this book is just so freaking cute. Like, Justin is such a solid love interest. He's so endearing. He sends her like surveys about what she wants to do on their dates, and then like afterwards he sends her exit surveys. I'm like, that's so cute. And I just really enjoyed their romance. I also really enjoyed a lot of the more like personal things that were going on with both of them, and I thought it was really interesting to add that in here. Also, because this book is dual POV, you get to see that a lot more intimately with both of them. And even though I normally don't enjoy dual POV, I think it really worked for this book and I really liked it in this scenario. So I loved Just for the Summer. If you guys have not tried out Abby Jimenez, I would highly recommend. I'm not even like that much of a contemporary romance person. I do enjoy some, but like I feel like the vast majority of them I'm kind of just like eh. But this one was like a solid almost 5-star. It wasn't quite a 5-star, but it was like an almost 5-star. Then next up, I did read a book that I've been meaning to read for the longest time because I absolutely love the movie adaptation for it, and that is obviously Kiki's Delivery Service by Aiko Kudono. But basically, if you guys don't know, this is based off of the Studio Ghibli movie, which I love so dearly. I think it was the second one that I ever watched, and I just love it so much. It's so cute. So I've been meaning to read the book that the movie was based on for so long, and I'm so glad that I finally did because it was so cute. If you guys don't know the story of Kiki's Delivery Service, basically you're following our main character Kiki, who is a witch, and when witches turn 13, they kind of leave their hometown, go to a new town, and kind of help the people of that general area. So obviously you are following Kiki as she does that. This is a very big kind of coming of age story. You're following Kiki as she's out in the world on her own for the first time. And it's just adorable, honestly, because you're following her as she opens up her own delivery service where she flies things around the city on her broom for people. The book definitely feels a lot more episodic than the movie does, because in the movie you see her go on like a couple of different ones, but it still feels like a very continuous kind of narrative. But once you get to a certain point in the book, it's kind of every chapter is like a different delivery that she's going on. And I really like that. I feel like a lot of middle grade kind of ends up feeling episodic, and that's definitely not a bad thing. It kind of makes me feel nostalgic for the books that I used to read because they very much feel the same way. But I love Kiki as the main character. I love the friends that she ends up making in the story as well. And I also love Gigi, who is her little talking cat. So if you're looking for a quick, fun read, I would definitely recommend picking up Kiki's Delivery Service, especially if you love the movie and you haven't read the book yet. Then quickly, I do want to just mention that I read City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. Me and Cass are going to be doing a live show for this book, I believe the day after this video is posted. But for Weapons and Words, we are starting the Daevabad trilogy, so in May we're reading the first one, next month we'll read the second one, and then in July we will read the last one. I didn't really love the start of this series. I feel like there are some aspects to it that I liked, but there are a lot of aspects to it that I didn't hate them, but I just felt very like indifferent towards them. I will definitely go into my thoughts more in that live show, but like I don't want to exhaust the topic before I like go and do our whole discussion about it tomorrow. So I wasn't blown away by this one, but I'm definitely intrigued to continue the series because I think the ending of this book does open up the world quite a bit, and I am quite excited for that. And then the last book that I have physically that I want to talk about, the rest of these I don't have copies of anymore, but the last one that I do have with me is actually a classic, and I'm so happy that I finally read one of the 2 classics that I said I wanted to read this year. I was getting a little stressed because it was already May and I set out to read 2 new classics this year and I hadn't done that yet. But I now feel so much better about it because I picked up Persuasion by Jane Austen. I've also been wanting to read some more Jane Austen works. I definitely want to read like all 6 of them at some point in time, like soon. I don't want to say this year because I do have 3 left and I don't want to read 3 of them this year, but I do just want to have read them all at some point in time, somewhat soon. You know what I'm saying? So I figured Persuasion would be a really good one to kind of ease me back into that because it is one of her shorter works. I think this might be her second shortest. Maybe. I think Northanger Abbey is a bit shorter. I picked this one up and I actually loved, maybe not the story itself, I liked it a lot. I wouldn't say I loved it, but I love the experience of reading classics because I annotate the hell out of them because it's so fun. I love annotating classics more than I love annotating any other kind of book, just because I feel like there are so much to kind of pick apart and dissect in them, and I always feel like I get the most out of a classic when I annotate it, because I have tried to read Persuasion previously. I think about 3 years ago I tried to read it and I made it about 80 pages into it. I wasn't annotating it at the time, so I wasn't like retaining anything from it. So I eventually decided to DNF it, you know, back then, but I wanted to give it another try and I ended up enjoying this so much. I don't think it's like my favorite Jane Austen. I think Pride and Prejudice is still my favorite, but this is definitely now my second favorite because the romance in this one was honestly, it was so cute. I loved the whole like second chance romance vibe going on in the story. Actually, maybe let me tell you what this is about, in case you don't know. Basically, this book is following our main character, Anne Elliot, who 8 years ago was engaged to Captain Frederick Wentworth. However, she was persuaded to break off her engagement because Captain Wentworth was not of a acceptable social standing to those around her, basically. And this whole book takes place 8 years after that event happened, when due to some certain turns of events, they end up in the same social circle again. I just loved the yearning in this book, like the lingering stares, the stilted conversations, oh, and the reconciliation at the end, because like you knew it was coming, was so good. So I was really invested in like that whole situation in this book. But obviously, because this is a Jane Austen book, there is a lot more being discussed in this book, like even more so than the romance, obviously, because this talks a lot about like, you know, class, social mobility and how that was changing at this point in time and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure there are a lot of things that I missed on this first read, but I feel like Jane Austen books are the kind of books that you can read over and over again and still absolutely love them, but like find new things to enjoy about them every time. So I'm not really that mad if like I missed anything this time around, because I will read this again and I'll pick it up then probably, or maybe the next time. Who knows? All I know is I had the best time reading this book and it has renewed my vigor in wanting to read classics. I did recently buy Emma, which I would really like to read at some point in time this year. I know it is a little bit longer, but I know a lot of people say it's really funny, and I love Jane Austen's wit so much. I feel like it wasn't present as much as it was in some of her other works in this one. I felt like her writing was a little bit more lyrical almost in this book. I believe this was the last book that she wrote before she unfortunately passed away, so I think her writing had developed a lot in this one, but I do miss the wit. I love the wit. So yes, I loved Persuasion so much, and I cannot wait to read some more of Jane Austen, hopefully in the near future. And then I do have 3 books which I don't currently have copies of anymore, or maybe I didn't have them to begin with, who knows. The first one that I want to talk about is a book that I read for my little Patreon readathon that I had earlier in this month. It was just a book that somebody on one of my sprints randomly recommended to me, and I was like, I've been wanting to read that book. So I read The Moomins and The Great Flood. I have been aware of the Moomins for a long time. I'd been wanting to read one of the books that featured the Moomins for a long time just because they're so cute. So someone recommended that I pick this one up, and I thought that was a great idea, and the ebook was immediately available from my library. So I read it, and it's basically just following these Moomins as they progress through this forest in search of Papa Moomin, and it's raining a lot. It was really cute. I don't really think I have like anything I was gonna say anything profound, but I'm not trying to claim that I've said anything profound in this video so far. But like, I don't really have a lot of thoughts on it, aside from the fact that I love the illustration style. I didn't really care too much for the story. It was fine, it was cute, but like, it is for children, so it's not exactly like suited to my taste, which is what I would expect. But I love the illustrations so much. They are so charming, honestly, so I loved it a lot for that, and I would consider reading more of the Moomin books. Then I also read Yona of the Dawn 41. I actually ended up unhauling this just because I didn't love volume 41. I thought it was fine. I do find my interest somewhat waning as I continue on with the series, which pains me to say, but I just feel like we're 41 volumes into this and there's like no end in sight, frankly. And while I love these characters so much, I like it a lot. I like it a lot, but I just don't like it as much as I used to. You know what I'm saying? However, I know I will go back and reread all the volumes at some point, and I will be having the best time. But I feel like the later volumes just aren't really as interesting to me as the earlier volumes, because I think the series does get a lot more political than what I was initially expecting. And I think it's interesting, but it's just not what I read Yona of the Dawn for. Maybe you would like the later volumes if you are into more like political fantasy, but I'm just not for the most part. Like, sometimes I can get into it, but like not really with Yona. And then the last book that I want to talk about is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this book, honestly, because I didn't really like it that much. I enjoyed Serpent and the Wings of Night, but like the ending of that book really kind of turned me off from it overall. And then like going into the second book, I really did not like the beginning of this book. I just thought it was boring. I was so over Oriah and Rain and their back and forth, her being like, oh my god, I hate you, but like, you're so hot. And I'm like, girl, Come on. And I think it did get better in the second half, but I just did not care about Rain and Araya. However, I do believe the first book in the second duology that's like in this set of 3 duologies is coming out maybe later this year, and I think it follows Mish and her story. And I read the synopsis for it, and it sounds really good, so I'm quite excited to pick up that one. I just don't think that the, is it called the Nightborn duet? I just don't think this one was really for me. So we have arrived at the end of the wrap up. Obviously, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would love to know down below what some of the books that you read in May were. Obviously, I would love to know your favorites, but if you are feeling shady, I would love to hear your least favorites. I definitely find those to be the most interesting. I think you all know what my least favorite one is because I just talked about it, so with that, I'm going to let you guys go. Although also before I go, I do want to give a shout out to everybody over on my Patreon. Love you guys so much. If you're ever looking for more content from me, that is always linked down below. We do some fun stuff. I do extra videos, journaling content, we do readathons, and we do a monthly buddy read. I'm so excited for our June buddy read because we are finally going to be reading Strange the Dreamer. If you guys don't know, Strange the Dreamer is kind of like what my Patreon theme, well, not kind of, it is what my Patreon theme is based off of, and this is going to be my very first reread of Strange the Dreamer, which is one of my favorite books of all time. So I'm a little bit nervous, but still really excited to do the reread. So I will be posting a spoiler-filled reading vlog of that at the end of June, which I cannot wait to film. I think it's gonna be so fun. So if you want to come join for that, you could. But obviously you don't have to. It's just if you want to. But with all that being said, I'm finally going to let you guys go. So again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all having an amazing Friday, if that is the day you are watching this video. And I'm going to let you guys go. Bye.